It was Saturday, October 23rd, 2010, and I was a fairly bored 17-year-old Jimmy, searching for some meaningful creative project to sink my teeth into. As a lifelong fan of Doom, I'd been playing through a number of custom level sets of the era, and was finding it very hard to shake the urge to do one of my own. Up until that point, I'd only released small deathmatch maps for the Skulltag multiplayer port, which had all received moderate to good reviews from the community, so while I was no stranger to mapping for Doom, I'd released practically zero single-player maps, on account of A, having very little experience overall. Most of my earlier attempts were just too terrible for even an ironic, hey look at how bad this is type of release to the public, and B, my lack of patience and forward thinking for doing more complicated layouts, as I'd get a couple of rooms in and then my creativity would just seize up completely. I felt a little frustrated with myself, truth be told, and my mapping skills in general, along with my personal discipline in the creative process itself, were in serious need of a brush-up, if I were to feel confident in calling myself a Doom mapper. I set my sights on a set of 10 to 11 smallish maps, which I hoped would get my single-player mapping prowess up to speed. It was not an entirely unreasonable goal, although I was aware I still had a lot to learn, and a one-man undertaking was quite a formidable one, especially to a 17-year-old kid who only just barely knew what he was doing. I started planning and introduced the idea to my good buddy Mechadon. He and I had been involved in many projects up to that point, including Sabbat Martyr Deathmatch, the very first community project that features maps of mine. He approved wholeheartedly, and volunteered his advice for when I stumbled over the various limitations of mapping for classic Doom. The working title for the project was actually Generics, which would, in my mind, completely reflect the nature of the maps. My original specification for the maps was small, easy, modest, probably not very memorable. So the goal wasn't to stand out amongst the crowd, but rather to get some gears turning in my head. This title stuck for about 5 days, and then I settled on Genesis. Fitting, I thought, for my inaugural mapping venture. With some time off school during half-term break, I started creating, planning the maps out on paper beforehand if I deemed it necessary, then speed mapped like a demon. I also took some old layouts of mine from about 7 years prior, I'm talking 2003 to 2005, and worked those into the mix. It wasn't an easy process. Mapping in the format for classic Doom source ports was something I was not accustomed to, and the initial week of mapping for the project saw me bursting into fits of confusion and rage at the new limitations I had presented myself with. But before too long, by October 31st, 2010, 8 days later, I had 11 maps in good working condition. This small map set, upon its eventual release, after many testing and bug fixing sessions, saw a good share of praise from the community. Feeling like I was onto something, I decided that I'd definitely go for the full 32 level, one-man Mega WAD. From there, the project escalated in both scale and overall map quality as my confidence steadily grew. I was picking up steam fast. Each new map I made was an effort to outdo my previous attempt. Over the course of the next year and a bit, I released Genesis in 3 separate chapters of 11, 20, and 32 maps in length, respectively. This model turned out to be beneficial to me as a fledgling mapper, as I received a steady stream of feedback from my private playtesters and the community at large over the ensuing months. I'd finally found a niche, a way to unleash some of my dormant creativity on the community for the first time in years. And in the cases where I speed mapped, imposing a time limit on myself encouraged me to take it seriously, almost like I was duty-bound to finish it. Genesis was, of course, not completely without its periods of development limbo. I did go weeks, maybe months at a time, without even looking at it. With my motivation to keep it afloat fluctuating wildly, and the introduction of all sorts of inescapable commitments, real life and otherwise, its progress threatened to halt completely. I released the final project to the id Games archive just before my family and I began the process of moving from the UK to Australia, on the early morning of the 28th of November 2011. Just over a year of development had finally yielded a megawad's worth of content. It was almost rushed out, in fact, because the 2011 CAC Awards ceremony was looming on the horizon. It would be only 12 days before the awards went live. Did I succeed? I think I'll save that story for later. I consider Genesis to be the project that truly kick-started my mapping career, and for my first foray into classic Doom mapping, it doesn't feel like I did that bad of a job. Granted, there are parts of it that to this day make my inner critic cry, we'll get to those, but they're overshadowed by the sense of achievement that I still carry from having finally finished and released this thing. I'll now go ahead and take you through the whole project, map by map, and give a little bit of personal insight into the creative process behind each one. And here's the usual forewarning, just in case Genesis has passed you by in the last 10 years, there will be spoilers ahead. Level 1, Treatment Plant. This map is perhaps literally where it all began. With its initial draft dating back to 2006 or 7, back when I first discovered mapping for Skulltag, I began work on a small map set imaginatively entitled RPSE, Random Plutonia Skulltag Episode. It, like most of my earliest projects, never went anywhere. Treatment Plant was to be level 1 in that as well, although due to lack of creative juice, I didn't actually manage to expand the map past the initial starting area and the forked slide room past the first door, so the rest of this map was done in October 2010. It starts Genesis off pretty strong, with Revenants used quite liberally and quite daringly on UV difficulty, and requires all 3 keys to exit. I think its overt orthogonality is something of a downside. Everything is needlessly square here. There were several moments that I looked back at this map and felt a strong urge to redo the whole thing. Even now I feel like it could potentially be so much more. Overall though, I'm not too displeased with it, and it fits the level 1 slot okay. To this day I've been using this helipad in my maps. Hey, self-plagiarism is legit, okay? Level 2, the Canal. This was originally the first serious single-player map that I probably ever put together, back in 2004, so before I joined the community. At the time, I'd been working on a fairly incomprehensible yet ambitious mega WAD for Z-Doom entitled G-Force, which was also going to feature 32 maps and all sorts of borrowed custom content. I'm not showing footage, it was that terrible. However, I still looked on at this map with some degree of fondness, so I decided to remake it for Genesis. It came together pretty quickly. I always loved the combination of textures I chose for it. Brown, stone and bricks just worked so well with floors full of green nukage. This room though? I really put detail above gameplay here, I think. To this day I still find it painful to negotiate. Level 3, the Oasis Facility. Not much of a history behind this one, as it's the first true original. This was definitely my favourite map in Genesis for a while, although it's far from the best showcase of my current level of mapping ability in the set. I think the only gripe I have with it is that in places it's too cramped to befit the combat that I placed down, and there seem to be quite a few non-essential switches. And yes, that is Pendulum's Under the Waves you're listening to, arranged in MIDI by me. Level 4, the Garden Terminal 2. This map might be the oldest map in the whole WAD. Another G-Force entry, it was simply going to be called The Temple. Creative. I initially wanted to make a huge mainly outside map after taking a look at the first few levels of Serious Sam the Second Encounter, quickly realising that I didn't have the chops to recreate the visuals of that game faithfully in the slightest. I mean, of course. I took this opening room that I'd made all those years ago and spiced it up with ideas taken from the Garden Terminal map from Hell Revealed, which starts with a similar feeling introductory room. This turned into a pretty cool map overall, although a first-time player might dither for a bit, trying to find where to go in its slightly maze-like layout. The Revenant ambush by the yellow key is a knockout, and this sequence with the pillars and the door opening sequentially was fun to do in the boom mapping format, with voodoo doll conveyors. Level 5, Submerged Refinery. Here we have another old map originally made for random Plutonia Skulltag episode. This map got one of the best glow-ups in the whole of Genesis. It got more spacious, had some optional areas bolted on for extra excitement, and had a texturing overhaul as well that helped it carry a grungy, dirty, industrial theme between the previous map and the next. I think this map wound up being the first proper showcase for Stuart Rinn's adrenaline-pumping MIDI Rusty Bridge. He composed it for a speed MIDI session of mine eons ago. Perhaps the first one I ever held? This track stood the test of time very well though. Level 6, Way Station, an old map from 2008 or 9 that I mapped out most of in an afternoon. Again, it was to be a candidate for random Plutonia Skulltag episode, but was actually made a lot more recently than the rest of them. It's certainly younger than both Treatment Plant and Submerged Refinery. I'm quite fond of it, but it's really quite brutal with the myriad snipers you have to deal with, and this rude as hell drop into a pit full of chain gunners. This map is also the first time my original track Pistons saw use, a piece that would then go on to feature in Eternity, and like a whole heap of other Doom WADs. Seriously, to this day people still love this track it seems. Level 7, Dead Center. This was the second map that I made specifically for Genesis, borrowing textures originally featured in NJ's Marine Assault, and I think, again, it took me little more than an afternoon. I was really getting into a groove here, although you have to admit, a map like this would not take anyone long to make. It's a big rocky arena with a huge square tower, and the gameplay is a glorified Dead Simple. I sorta hoped I would do a little more with this map, but in the end I was pretty satisfied with how it came out. The exit to this map is actually pretty cool, especially with how seamlessly it transitions into the next map. Level 8, Plunge. Welcome to the Sewers. This one was mapped specifically for Genesis in the space of a day on December 28th, 2010. For a sewer level, I think it looks nice, simplistic in its execution, but with just the right amount of texture variation to keep it from looking boring. Gameplay wise, it is a bit of a wake up call with this imposing throng of cacos and this archvile. After Stewboy wrote a brilliant piece entitled Sewer Chase, I knew immediately that it needed a map to go along with it. I sort of have to credit him with this map existing at all. Level 9, Slime Vaults. More sewers. This map actually dates back to about 2008 when the 10 Textures Zdoom community project was first being worked on. This was originally going to be an entry into that project, but I wound up losing the inspiration to keep going. I picked it up again a few years later in 2011 and polished it off for Genesis' final release. However, I do consider it one of the weaker offerings in the set. There's just not many good ideas at play here aside from maybe the 4 descending cages at the end of the map, which I think rounds the level off quite nicely, even though it is fairly unforgiving. Still, what was I thinking with this wannabe entryway? And this switch room that does basically nothing except wear out your keyboard. Final thoughts on this are, I've done better. Level 10, Ruins. Initially planned for GeForce, but I never mapped anything beyond the first 2 areas. I still wanted to do a map in a similar vein though, but I was at a loss with what to do with the original, so I just scrapped it and started afresh. For anyone wondering, the majority of this map's unique textures come from Scientist 2, which is a brilliant WAD in its own right, definitely check it out. I also have to credit a lot of this map's atmosphere to Stewboy's excellent MIDI, Garden. Definitely feels to me like one of the standout maps in the set, and I'm always happy to get a little lost in it. Level 11, Devil's Industry. Reportedly inspired by Requiem and Vile Flesh. Like a few of the maps in this set where I began mapping for it, this map suffered from starting room is too cool syndrome. I didn't really have a propensity for thinking ahead at this stage of my mapping career, and I ran out of ideas here pretty fast, having to take a few days to get my groove back. Even today I reckon it's a slightly missed shot. Some of the areas in this map feel overly confined or too dark, and I had to enlist Mechadon's help with this bridge because it had me absolutely in fits with how prone to breaking it was. There's also a bunch of timed doors that make moving back and forth between key locations in this map quite unnecessarily painful. I don't love this map, but I don't hate it either. You've at least got another pendulum MIDI to keep you going. Level 12, Highway of Destruction. A massive gear shift pretty much out of nowhere. A completely linear race past swathes of demons waiting to cut you down. This cliffside tarmac battlefield is definitely a far cry from many of the previous maps, and the closest to outright slaughter gameplay this set dares to get. 100%ing this map is needlessly painful because of all the snipers. There's all sorts of difficult spots where monsters can really put the hurt on you, especially with this spider mastermind out in the wide open. I do kinda love the crazy mob rush of demons at the end. I don't think I'd ever made anything quite like this map up to this point, and it remains to be seen whether I'll make something like it again. The Green Herring's forward-thrusting rapid-fire MIDI entitled Shoot the Guns Out of Their Hands fits this map pretty well. I believe this was another MIDI made for a speed composition event that I kickstarted, so it made sense for me to use it here. Level 13, Transporter Station. A fairly middle-of-the-road tech-based shootout that acts as a pivot point between the last few grey industrial levels and the more colourful couple of levels that follow. I heeded some advice about angling my rooms differently here, so there's a few parts of this map that don't conform to a completely square layout. Nothing amazing, but it showed I was learning and keen to change things up. It's a fun map to navigate, hard to get lost in, and has some nice eye candy. Not too shabby. This Spider Mastermind can go to hell though. Level 14, Poisoned Ocean. Alien Vendetta inspired, here we have the first map I ever made specifically for Genesis. The creation of this map marked the beginning of what would be a year-long journey for me into the art of mapping. That said, a lot of amateur mapping mistakes are present. There's a mishmash of themes, even though I tried to emulate some of AV's mapping facets with this one. Things are sized weirdly in places, and there were a few too many scrambles for timed doors. I wonder if I should have given this one a makeover like I did with map 5. Even so, it's pretty fun. The music is my track Pathogen, a Kraftwerk-inspired MIDI that seems decidedly undoomy at first, but eventually it just grew on me. Level 15, Alchemy. I feel like in no small way this is the map that everyone remembers from Genesis, which is fairly impressive for a map at the midway point, I suppose. That might be down to its bright gold liquid fall visuals, the frantic and sometimes unforgiving gameplay, or its custom MIDI, which was never even slated for this map, but the map in my original track Voyage eventually wound up being the perfect couple here. The layout came together pretty quickly at an almost stream of consciousness pace, and I'm happy it did. Alchemy is definitely a standout for me, and it assuredly has been for others over the last decade. The right textures in the right place can make all the difference in the world, it seems. Let's go to the secret levels then. Level 31, Duality. Quite the gimmick map, this. In case the starting room doesn't make it blindingly obvious, this is a mashup of Map 2 from Plutonia and Map 2 from TNT, a concept I haven't played around with before, or since really. I found transforming the layout after the fake exit to be quite fun, and this cyber demon I placed down in the main area turned out to be pretty punishing. Good fun. Level 32, Reprise. This map is essentially the canal, pretty much how it was in its prototypical incarnation from 2004. I cleaned up some texture issues here and there, but functionally this map is identical to how it was back then. It's definitely dated, there's a huge focus on orthogonal shapes here, and the monster placement is all over the shop. Again, I apparently had no idea how effective this Cyberdemon was going to be when I placed him down initially. He is a bastard. The player's reward for finding both secret levels in Genesis is a pain floor exit, leaving you with under 10% health to deal with the next map. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks a lot. Level 16, Crestfallen. I seem to recall this being the last map I started work on for the project. Heavily inspired by the Canyon of the Dead map from No Rest for the Living, which stuck out to me a great deal with its elegant use of natural-looking curves and rock formations, this map isn't exactly full of surprises, but it's fairly solid, has a nice variety of settings, including a dingy fortified tech base and a foreboding marble tomb, sandwiching rubble-filled ochre valleys, plus it has some tricky archvile spawns to keep you on your toes. Good stuff, even if it's nothing super special. I think I'd very much found my groove by this point. Level 17, Deadline. A roller coaster of a map, quite literally. Amazingly, the majority of it was created in about 7 hours time, although in fairness, you can see a lot of copy and paste procedures were performed to make this map what it is. This map sticks out in people's minds for perhaps a few reasons. First of all, the music. Prototype was the first of what turned into a small series of collaborations directly between myself and Stewboy, and to this day, people are still rating it very highly. If the music didn't stick out to you, these friggin' rails surely did. They serve little purpose other than to make negotiating these earthy tunnels a royal pain in the backside, because despite being smashed in several places, they're apparently still live and can zap you for massive damage if you linger on them for a touch too long. Even more egregious is this section at the map's tail end, which has a flooded section with the water being visibly electrified. Full of winding corridors, pitfalls, nasty traps and fiendish monster placement right up until the end, this map definitely doesn't mess about. I still think it's a very strong offering in this set. Just as well, really. Level 18, Mineshaft. Oh dear God. I hate this. What went wrong here? What persuaded me to make a map that makes you wait more than 10 seconds for not one but two extremely slow-moving lifts that take you between the 3 floors of this map? Why does it feel like the map is like 90% boring brown corridor, and why is the texturing so deliberately inconsistent? How are there points of progression like this that can easily have you backtrack for several grueling minutes if you happen to fall down the wrong hole? Abhorrent. Shameful. I hate this map so much, and I'd remake it in a heartbeat if being reminded of its mere existence didn't drain me of my will to live. Grade F. Difficulty... Okay, I'm not doing that. Level 19, Subterranean Labs. Originally a slide layout. Put down the pitchforks and torches, okay? This was for a slide tune-up project called All Slided Up, and I worked so hard on it. This map wound up being a highly satisfying offering in the end. The cave system here might be one of the most elaborately detailed areas in my early mapping career. Look at this goddamn forklift, and it's square wheels. Lots of lush detail, fun and bombastic gameplay with a couple of nasty surprises, and it doesn't outstay its welcome unlike map 18. Level 20, Into the Gate. This map is supposed to act as the final tech base, the epicenter of Hell's invasion. The Gateway technicians themselves have been possessed by demonic influence, and they appear as a new enemy, the Mutant Marine. They're not super different from shotgunners, although they fire off shots without much hesitation compared to the former, so your traditional evasive tactics will need to be sharpened against these guys. This map also features the only MIDI by Paul Corfiatis written bespoke for Genesis, Mysteries of the Quiola. Ready for the Hell maps? Hope so. Genesis' latter third starts off pretty rough. Level 21, The Other Side. Reportedly built in 6 hours, this is a spicy, Scythe 2 inspired Hell map drenched in running blood. It foists a lot of stuff on you all at once, perhaps an unreasonable amount. You have to pistol a lot of stuff, including the bulky mutant marines, imps and pinkies, and then there's revenants perched high up to fling their rockets at you from an unfair vantage point. Very punishing considering the forced pistol start. Zaza provides us with an ominous church organ and synth-infused MIDI, which very nicely underpins the claustrophobic carnage this map has to offer. Level 22, Haunted Halls. A Memento Mori-inspired map created towards the end of Genesis' development. Also pays homage to a room from Hell Revealed map 8. The layout here is weird, to say the least, and certainly not intuitive. The fights aren't quite fine-tuned properly to fit the space, I think, so you wind up door camping or stair camping an awful lot. Many times I've been yelled at for these red key bars that you can't open from this side, requiring you to do a full circuit of the map just so that you can lower the floor in the room you were just in. Pretty terrible, honestly. Although far from the worst in the set, I feel like I could easily redo this map today about 10 times better, in about a tenth of the time. Level 23, the Atrium. Another one of the oldest offerings here. Originally, the Atrium was a 3-hour speed map made in 2009 for the Doom Advent Calendar project. This small but punishing castle map is full of devious, confined encounters and open warfare. The path to complete it is almost entirely linear, so it's fairly hard to get lost here, and the secrets if you do stumble into them are pretty rewarding. I'm still fond of this one, despite its datedness. The MIDI track is named Distant Tranquility, one of mine, and it's about as old as the map. An urgent-sounding, guitar-driven track with sturdy bass lines and string smatterings. Still quite lovingly looked upon, this track, I think. Level 24, Hades Wall. This map looks a lot meaner than it actually is. Aside from a few chain gunner and archvile encounters and some pointed fights over damaging lava, it doesn't have too much spice. Most of the struggle here is with regards to navigation. The layout does require you to do some awkward backtracking and running for timed doors. I don't know why I included these arrows on the floor pointing to the keys when I could have just made the keys visible at all times to begin with. The spider mama in the exit room won't give you any hassle unless you do something stupid. The MIDI track of mine for this map, Sunset Over Babylon, has certainly met with good reception and has seen use in probably one of the most infamous maps going right now, that being Sunder Map 15, the unfeasibly enormous Egyptian slaughterfest, Babylon's Chimera. Level 25, the Carcass Pit. Not quite Slaughter, but not quite your average map either. You won't spend much time in the central structure, as most of the gameplay here takes place in the vast swarming canyon that cradles it. Monsters are everywhere here, some of them quite devilishly placed, although the main fight in the titular pit is so easy to avoid completely. While I definitely view this map favourably, I think it's a missed opportunity to go for some properly fun and engaging slaughter here, and it probably wouldn't take much tweaking either. We've got a really pretty pizzicato-filled MIDI by Revenant to keep the atmosphere intense and oppressive all the same. Level 26, the Savage Abyss. Okay, this is where Jimmy gets nasty. This yawning twilight crater has you scrambling frantically for 3 keys amidst unruly hordes of enemies possessing the highest monster count in the whole set. There are fights in this map rather reminiscent of Plutonia, Alien Vendetta and Deus Vult, not to mention this section ripped straight out of Evolution Map 28. It's basically a disproportionately punishing amalgam of several schools of slaughter that I've played over the years. Not exactly refined either. Some areas can be cheesed pretty easily, while others are monster placed so unforgivingly that they essentially force you to take an unkind amount of damage. If you enjoy the Doom equivalent of non-consensually having your nipples tweaked, this is probably the map for you. Apparently I speed mapped most of this thing out in 14 hours one day in October 2010, probably was the fastest I'd ever mapped up to that point. Jamie Robertson's sole musical work in Genesis accompanies this map. Originally slated for Plutonia 2, his track Song in the Key of TNT to me felt like it encapsulated the sinister vibe of TNT's soundtrack, particularly concerning its harder maps, quite excellently. Level 27, hang on, Jimmy. Please explain this. Oh, fine. So, basically, in level 26, there's a fight in which stalagmites could potentially be used to block enemy projectiles in certain source ports. During early playtesting of this map, I noticed my sibling using the strategy quite liberally, and eventually made the callous, cold-hearted decision to remove one stalagmite actor from this corner of the map. It was some unknown date in 2011 that Stumpy was retired from duty. Rest in peace, Stumpy. We will never forget. On that happy note, level 27, the Vulcanum. This is another viciously hard one, drawing heavy influence from Erikarm's Scythe duology, but with considerably less bite overall than map 26. Don't get me wrong though, this first one will mangle first-time players and seasoned players alike. It is woeful. The perched cyberdemons and archviles are a constant nuisance, and the BFG is pretty much the only viable option here, so it forces you to use a tremendous amount of cells in your bid to survive, unless you can find this hidden area that allows you to duke it out personally with one of the cybers. Like the previous map, it requires all 3 keys, but the individual routes to get to those keys aren't quite so stuffed silly with opposition. Instead, the environment will play havoc with you. As soon as you can find a rad suit or invulnerability, use it as unabashedly as you can, because there are not many here. Things are ramping up in intensity, that's for sure, and I'm going to place a spoiler here for those who've not made it this far by themselves. Level 28, Baphomet's Keep. Mapped out in June 2011 and something of a climactic apex point for the whole set, this map is set in a dim fortress floating in a crimson sea. The encounters themselves aren't unjustly cruel, but again, certain parts of the level seem to mock you by way of how they're shaped and spaced out. This tightrope section is really weird and arcadey, for example, and you could probably cheese it quite easily if you're any good at moving Doomguy correctly. This map is fairly dread-inducing, but still a mostly fun, bloody romp. Not nearly as painful as the last couple of maps, in fact it's almost like a breather. That is, until you reach the final fight. The floating Baphomet can't be killed through conventional means, so instead you have to run for your life and hit 4 switches sequentially on this huge skybound pentagram in order to expose its core. Definitely will take you a few tries if you haven't quite got the rhythm down pat. I think Stewboy's music really makes this one. The Greater Good is a powerful orchestral anthem with incessant military drumming and sharp string work that in a way gives this map a deft sense of finality. Level 29, Mutant Genesis. I tried to make a creepy map. Originally the only monster present here was supposed to be the Mutant Marines, but I had a real tough time making that into anything fun. This worn out Marine headquarters makes for a pretty underwhelming penultimate map if I'm honest. The texturing here is a bit weird and scattershot, there's some unusual progression stuff going on, and it's dark as all hell. The office area has a switch that is baked into a mere 4 pixels of the surrounding texture, and if you miss this you can't finish the map. That's just pointlessly obscure even for me, who loves a good hexen map. All 3 keys are once again required to exit, and you'll need to do a lot of exploring and wandering to find them all. Good luck is all I can say. Any and all criticism levelled at this map's obtuseness is entirely deserved. Just as well that the next and final map is if anything too straightforward. Level 30, Abysm.
Bit of a strange one, this one. A grisly palace of pulsating flesh and gore. The final boss of Genesis is this nameless monstrosity that, like your average icon of sin, rapidly fills the map with randomly spawned monsters. A kind of combat puzzle which has you navigating fairly treacherous timed puzzles in order to seek out a proper vantage point from which you can vanquish the beast. 2 paths are available and only one needs to be completed in order to reach one of the BFGs. You can potentially shoot this thing to death from afar, which would take you a few minutes of fairly arduous rocketing as monsters continuously become a nuisance, but in order to get a really good shot, you need to be up close and personal and throw BFG balls directly into its faces. Possessing 5,000 hit points, this boss goes down fairly quickly with repeated BFG shots, and ample ammunition is provided. Looking back, the concept is fine, but the execution could have perhaps been a lot stronger. Like most icons of sin throughout Doom history, this one was pretty much fated to be not the greatest amount of fun. But here's a fun fact, I had some help with the sprites for this boss monster from Mike12, who would then go on to do other things. That concludes my retrospective of Genesis, my first solo MegaWAD. I still view it favourably even though I know my mapping has come along in leaps and bounds since the early 2010s, and to this day, people still play it on stream and record speedrunning demos of it. It certainly made quite a splash on the scene, even if it's by no means the greatest one-man MegaWAD ever produced, which, who am I to say it is anyway? It was no small challenge, that's for sure. Creative block, technical obstacles, and IRL commitments would pose all manner of problems across its 13 months of development, but in spite of the ups and downs endured along the way, Genesis got me my first ever CAC award in December 2011. This was honestly a pretty huge deal for me. It was my very first outing into single-player mapping for Doom, and had been quite a long and tiring commitment over 13 months of testing, balancing, detailing, and tweaking. It's where I got my start as a single-player mapper for Doom, and as it turned out, I was committed enough to the art to stick with it another 10 whole years. Since then, I've produced a speed map set entitled Jiffy Bag, an Ultimate Doom replacement set of 36 levels entitled Deathless, and a set of episodes for Heretic entitled Faithless. That's 4 solo MegaWADs under my belt now, so you can see how Genesis kicked off an undying love for the craft of Doom mapping. And with Earthless looming just over the horizon, who knows what the future holds? Will I stop at 5 MegaWADs? Or will I while away another 10 years mapping relentlessly and foolhardily until I turn 40 years of age? These are the things I ponder as I consider how much time I've sunk into this 25-year-old game, and how I've loved just about every moment of it. I hope I provided an informative and enlightening perspective on this old MegaWAD for Doom, and if you want to play it for yourself, a link is in the video description as per usual. I wanted to put out a 10-year anniversary edition of Genesis with improved maps. I mean, the name Genesis is right there for the taking. But since this hasn't yet materialized, maybe the 15-year mark will be the one? I could call it Genesis 15. Oh dear, come on Jimmy, you're getting ahead of yourself. That's all from me for now. See you next time.
Thanks for watching, and happy CAC Awards season. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been wanting to make it since February, I kid you not. My Patreon backers got an early look at it, so if you fancy getting sneak peeks, exclusive content, discounts on commission rates, etc., please consider supporting me. I'll see you all in the new year. Cheers and Merry Christmas.